Fears of more turmoil after Haiti's president is assassinated. The country was already struggling with political infighting, violence, and natural disasters. So, what could happen next? And will the UN need to intervene again? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoum. The assassination of Haiti's president is the latest upheaval for the poorest country in the Americas. Unknown gunmen raided Jovenel Moïse's home in the capital, Port-au-Prince, killing him and wounding his wife. Police say they've killed 4 suspects and arrested 2 others. Prime Minister Claude Joseph announced a state of siege lasting 2 weeks. But it's unclear who's now in charge, as Moïse had named another man to replace Joseph. People we've spoken to in Haiti say they fear more chaos lies ahead. Rosalind Jordan reports.
The family of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse will not be able to hold an open casket funeral. Assassins shot him several times in the head in front of his wife and daughter early on Wednesday. Later that night, police arrested these 2 men in the Pétionville neighborhood of Port-au-Prince. They killed 4 other suspects. 3 officers were briefly held hostage during the raid. Moïse's killing upset local residents.
Imagine we live in this area close to the president. Even when we have problems with the president, we can't imagine they will kill him like this.
I heard something go boom, like an earthquake. I thought something under the soil had been turning.
The interim prime minister urged Haitians to remain calm.
I
have already spoken about the state of the siege declared. The president's body has already been transported into the morgue in the capital. The First Lady is out of danger and is being treated in Florida. As per the latest information, her state is stable.
Moïse's death came as he was in the middle of a political crisis. Parliament had been suspended for the past 2 years, and opponents accused Moïse of trying to undermine the Constitution. The U.S. backed Moïse's decision to stay in power for 1 more year, just so long as elections took place on time.
We need a lot more information, but it's very worrisome.
Even as the investigation begins, interim Prime Minister Claude Joseph and the man Moïse had picked to succeed him are fighting over who's in charge. Moïse's widow, Martine, was flown to the U.S. to recover from her injuries. But Haiti's border with the Dominican Republic is now closed. Authorities have shut down the airport until further notice, raising questions about how Haiti will recover from this attack on the body politic. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Haiti has been in political and financial turmoil for years. Gang violence and kidnappings are common, particularly in the capital, Port-au-Prince. Inflation is high, food and fuel scarce, and almost 60% of the population makes less than $2 a day. Haiti has also suffered a series of disasters, including an earthquake in 2010 that destroyed major infrastructure, a hurricane in 2016, and obviously most recently, the coronavirus pandemic. Political instability had led to thousands of protesters taking to the streets recently to demand President Jovenel Moïse's resignation. All right, for more on all this, I'm joined by our guests. In Washington, D.C. is Jenna Ben Yehuda, President and CEO of the Truman National Security Project and former Haiti analyst for the U.S. Department of State. In New York, Sam Bojarski, a reporter for the Haitian Times. And also in Washington, D.C., Jake Johnston, Senior Research Associate at the Center for Economic Policy Research and lead author of the organization's blog on Haiti relief and reconstruction. A warm welcome to you all. Sam, let me start with you today. Who exactly is in charge in Haiti right now? Is it interim Prime Minister Claude Joseph? And I ask that because a new Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, had been appointed a few days back, but he hadn't yet been sworn in, correct?
That's correct, and I believe he was expected to be sworn in later this week after Moïse was assassinated. But Claude Joseph, the interim prime minister, is currently running the country at the moment. Yes.
And do you believe that Claude Joseph has the political legitimacy to be able to run the country, or will there be, more political scuffles about who exactly is going to take charge going forward?
I would definitely expect to see more conflict over who's in charge. I know Ariel Henry, who was the man who was nominated to become prime minister by Moise. He's also claimed that he's the rightful prime minister and that it's his government. So I definitely expect more conflict going forward.
Jenna, there are growing calls for the international community and especially the United States to step in and do more to put an end to the violence in Haiti and the political crisis in Haiti. What are international actors, and more specifically the U.S., in a position to do at this point?
Well, thank you, Mohammed, and good morning. The situation on the ground is highly unstable. The UN Security Council will meet this afternoon in an emergency meeting. There are a couple of possibilities for what might happen. It's important that we recognize this really is Haiti's second earthquake. The first being geographical, dating back into 2010, and the second being political. This really is that devastating. I think it's possible we might see something akin to what we saw in the aftermath of former President Aristide's departure in 2004, which was the issuance of about a 3-month interim stabilization force that became the predecessor for what ultimately was the peacekeeping operation that was on the ground for 13 years. That's a possibility. Until we see something like that, I think we can expect more calls for calm.
You mentioned the peacekeepers who had withdrawn. Do you expect that they will actually make a return? And if that does happen, who needs to make the request? How does this happen going forward?
So MINUSTA was on ground for 13 years. They left about 4 years ago. It wasn't a perfect situation. It brought some modicum of stability, but we'll recall that of the $13 billion of foreign assistance that was provided by the international community from the earthquake and that extended beyond that, Haiti has very little to show for that. And the peacekeeping operation was certainly deeply flawed with widespread accusations, credible accusations of sexual assault, a cholera epidemic from Nepalese peacekeepers on ground. I think there is a reluctance to return to a full-fledged peacekeeping operation. There is some Haiti fatigue that can't be understated or overstated rather by the international community. There's been a sustained presence on ground for the better part of 2 decades in some way, shape, or form. So I do think there is a call, though, certainly the dynamics are so urgent that we'll see some forcible call for a presence of some sort on the ground to bring a modicum of stability. We need to see some signal from the Haitian government, but again, as my colleague here notes, there is real question as to who is in charge. So we're in a bit of uncharted territory here.
Jake, you had written a piece in which you discussed how the U.S. Would be better suited to change its policies toward Haiti. What do you think, from your perch, needs to happen? How does the U.S. need to change its policies toward Haiti?
Yeah, well, I think in the most immediate, to me, it's clear another intervention from the international community or from the U.S. would be a disaster, right? I mean, you look at Haiti's history, and this has been a history of foreign intervention, overturning elections, supporting coups d'etats, putting military troops on the ground. When you look at the situation today and then the crisis that you described and the deteriorating economic situation, security situation, et cetera, this is as much a product of international interventions and international policy as anything else, right? So to look to them for a solution, I think, is really misguided. And I think, again, yes, Haiti is, in a situation of political uncertainty today, right? But Haiti was in a position of political uncertainty before the assassination of President Moise. His own mandate was contested. There have been calls for his resignation and for a transitional government for some time, right? And I think the important part today and the important thing moving forward is to listen to those voices in Haiti, civil society organizations especially, who have been unanimous and quite clear about what they want to see going forward, right? And that doesn't involve foreign intervention, but involves putting together a credible and nonpartisan transitional government to oversee a return to democracy. Because, again, this democracy did not disappear with the assassination of President Moise. It has been undermined for many, many years, including by these foreign actors.
Jake, if you're talking about the undermining of democracy that's been going on for a long time in Haiti, of course, there have been growing calls for elections to be held. Elections were supposed to happen in September. Do you see that timeline being adhered to at this stage?
No, I don't. And I mean, I don't think even those who are saying they support the elections truly believe that they are able to do this, right? This has been, it's been an ongoing debate and discussion for some time, this push forward to elections. And we talk about a change in U.S. policy. I think this is, specifically what I was referring to. The international actors over the last, 6 months have been insistent that despite the lack of conditions for free and fair elections on the ground in Haiti, that elections must go forward, right? And I think this helped contribute to the crisis and really ratchet up tensions and push the nation to this point we're in today, right? And so to then come out the day after this and just act as if this hasn't changed the situation or hasn't changed that dynamic, again, I think this is moving towards a very dangerous situation if they continue to call for elections in the near future.
Sam, there's been so much reporting about how gang violence and kidnappings have surged under the tenure of President Moise. I want to ask first, why was that the case? And secondly, I want to ask you just how bad is the situation for Haitian citizens? I mean, how fearful are they right now from the gangs who are out on the streets claiming more territory? How fearful are they that they could get kidnapped at any time?
Well, yeah, I mean, the situation has definitely worsened over the past year. I think people are much more reticent about going outside. They're hanging, staying in their homes more, and that was definitely the case immediately after the assassination, where the streets were pretty quiet in many areas. So yes, there's definitely a climate of fear, but this issue with the gangs, it's definitely been getting worse over the past several years as the economic conditions in the country have deteriorated.
And what are you hearing right now from sources on the ground about the instability, about the fear, that is there right now because of this assassination? I mean, what kind of stuff are you hearing from people on the ground in different parts of Haiti?
Well, what I've heard is that people want a national dialogue right now. People want all the different actors in the country to come together and create a stable environment for elections. They're fearful about what's to come, about the situation right now, and I don't think people trust the current forces in charge to organize a credible process for elections right now.
Jenna, I saw you nodding along to some of what Sam was saying there. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think Sam's right on the money there. Haiti needs to ultimately solve this political crisis on its own and come to an electoral outcome that is supported by the Haitian people. Absolutely. But I would differ with Jake on this point. I think it's virtually impossible to guarantee a process that would be widely viewed as credible absent some sort of external, internationally supported process. Before we even get to elections, though, we really should be talking about some kind of stabilization mechanism to keep the peace on the ground. I think there is a very high propensity for widespread political violence. The gangs are armed to the teeth. The police have been overrun in recent months by gangs. There have been a number of gruesome killings of police officers. We just can't really capture the full extent of the political crisis that, as Jake rightly notes, has been ongoing for some time. So before we can get to talk of Haiti solving its political future, which of course it must in order for it to be tenable and sustainable in the long term, we need a stabilization aspect to calm elements on the ground so that kids can go to school, so that businesses can reopen, the airport, the border remain closed. And we need an investigation into who was behind this mercenary attack.
Well, that brings me to a follow-up question, Jenna. I mean, you're talking about the need for an investigation. Who conducts the investigation? And quite frankly, at this point, with so much political instability in Haiti, is the government there, in any type of position to conduct some kind of a thorough, credible investigation?
Well, as of yesterday, the State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, had said that the U.S. was ready to offer support, but had not yet received an official request. I suspect some sort of request may be forthcoming. It's in everybody's interest including both sides who claim rightful kind of heir to the throne, if you will, to have an independent external investigation. The credibility brought by an independent third-party element to conduct that investigation, I think, will be very important, putting aside what I think is the reality that there is not an indigenous capability to conduct the kind of sophisticated investigation that is required in this political dynamic on the ground.
Jake, there are those who say that President Moise was a target because he was clinging to power, because he was acting as an autocrat would and trying to expand his power. There are others who say that he was a target because of the reforms that he wanted to implement. Which of those scenarios is more likely?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to note, anything about motivations or responsibility here is pure speculation, right? And I think, we really need to take some time and to get more information, right? And not sort of feed into that rush to judgment. I think going back, though, to this issue of security, right? And I think it's really impossible to separate the security situation, the situation with the gangs, from the political situation itself, right? It have been political conflicts that are feeding the insecurity situation that have led to the politicization of the police, where there are open factions warring with one another within the police. Again, with politicians and elite groups funding both sides of gang conflict and gang warfare in Port-au-Prince, right? So to try and address the security situation without addressing the political situation, again, I think would be a misguided effort. Again, creating the space for a Haitian-led dialogue, for that process to take place, I think will have a dramatic impact on the security side of things, even absent any international intervention.
Jake, if we talk about the political dimension, the security dimension, we have to also talk about the humanitarian landscape there in Haiti. Just how dire is it right now, and how much has all of this instability and this power vacuum and the constitutional crisis and everything else that's going on there contributed to the suffering of Haitian people?
No doubt the situation is extremely tough. You've got over 4 million people food insecure right now. But I think, this is not just a product of recent political instability. This is a product of decades and even centuries of political power and economic power being concentrated in Port-au-Prince and greatly excluding and ignoring the rest of the country and the needs of the rest of the country. And I think also a product of the focus on international action. When you look at the fights for power in Port-au-Prince, Haitian politicians are competing for the interest of Washington, of Ottawa, of Paris. They're not competing for the interest of the Haitian people, right? Because they've seen who controls power and who gets to choose Haitian leaders, right? And it hasn't been the Haitian people throughout history. It's been these international actors. And if we want to see, a representative government, something that can actually address the interests of the majority of the population, that's what's going to have to change.
Sam, how much anger had President Moise been facing from the public over his attempt to hold on to power?
Well, I think it's been building ever since pretty much the start of his term, November 2017, when a Senate probe implicated him and others around him in corruption with the Petro-Caribe money, which was granted to Haiti. It was a loan from Venezuela to purchase oil. So that sparked popular protest in 2018, and then again in 2019. So that that popular anger has definitely been building over the years of his administration.
Does it look to you like right now there will be more anger directed toward the government? Will protests continue? Is it going to be a wait and see? From your vantage point, what do you think are some possibilities there?
Well, like I touched on earlier, I don't think there's going to be a lot of trust in this process as it's being organized by the current government. So, Moise was trying to organize a constitutional referendum later this year. It's currently scheduled for September 26th, and that also drew protests earlier this year. So, I can definitely see more unrest if that process goes forward.
Jenna, how much concern is there right now among regional leaders, and how might this impact the region, the Americas?
Well, we saw that the Dominican Republic was very quick to close that border, which admittedly is like locking your front door with a screen door. It's a pretty porous border. Some suspects remain at large. There's some question as to whether there might be some possibility that the suspects had fled to the Dominican Republic. So that was kind of the first reaction that we saw in the early hours following the attack. We've seen expressions of sympathy and concern from throughout the region. But again, as my colleagues have noted, the real capacity for support is going to come from nations like the United States and from Canada, in addition to European partners that have been longstanding. We saw some initial expressions of concern from the Organization of American States, their sub-regional body that addresses the Americas. But the capacity of regional actors to respond in this environment is going to be very, very limited. And that's why I think all eyes are on the UN Security Council emergency session.
Is there any concern among those regional leaders about this state of emergency or state of siege that's been declared, whether or not it has the potential to make things worse?
Well, we've got 15 days, right? And it is effectively martial law and gives the interim government, whoever that may be, and as we'll see as folks continue to assert themselves in that capacity, gives them 15 days to create an environment in which they have widespread authority to conduct investigations, shut down protests. So we'll be looking for additional displays of force on the ground and the dynamics surrounding that. The question, I think, really becomes what happens after this 15-day period. Haiti has a history, as do other nations in the region, in particular in Central America, for extending these kinds of emergency decrees for extended periods of time. So looking together for that 15-day mark, what happens after that, and what comes out of the Security Council session later this afternoon. I think both will be telling and paint a path forward. So look for that 2-week mark.
Jake, is there any chance at this point that Mr. Joseph would go to the opposition, would try to work out some kind of a deal going forward? Or is there a possibility that some type of transitional government could be put in place in a climate where things are so politically divided?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, I think it's important to note that this didn't begin with the assassination of President Moise, right? Again, there have been these ongoing discussions. That was why there was a new prime minister nominated, right? Was to try and, get some things moving, to appeal to certain actors within the opposition, right? So I think, we're gonna have to look at a few things. One is, this conflict between Claude Joseph and Ariel Henry, right? But also, I think in the bigger sense of things, those underlying political dynamics are still there, right, and will still drive what comes next. So we're talking about, certain actors push for elections and other actors calling for a transitional government, right? I think at this point it's really unfeasible to expect elections later this year, and that makes, the negotiations over a transitional government inevitable.
Jenna, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I saw you reacting to some of what Jake was saying there, so I want to give you the last word here.
I think it's going to be virtually impossible to imagine a dynamic in which suddenly a transitional government is possible without additional support externally. As Jake notes, there has been a deep political crisis ongoing for years. So the heinous and unexpected assassination of a sitting president is not going to bring about a sudden kind of political peace, if you will. If anything, it's going to inflame tensions and make what was already near impossible all the more challenging. I think we really need to manage expectations here, and what we can hope for in the near term is a modicum of calm.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Jenna Ben-Yehuda, Sam Bojarski, and Jake Johnston. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see this and all of our previous programs again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.